All in positions, ready for the second half. So carrying on with the FA Cup theme, Bob, I know that Tom and I have got floods of memories being Arsenal fans, particularly in the last 20 years or so under Arsene Wenger. One of those in particular that stands out, is etched in both of our minds, is that David Seaman save against Sheffield United in 2003 from the Pesci Solido header. I'm sure that ranks in your list. Can you just talk us through some of your FA Cup memories as a fan of Arsenal? I'm sure that's in there.
Well, I mean, that is incredible. Incredible from the point of view that I always said to people, I never taught Pat Jennings anything, but I did keep him going. He arrived in when he was 34 and he retired on his 41st birthday. And even Big Pat acknowledges it was because Willow kept encouraging me that I had another year in me. With David Seaman, he was the closest thing I'd ever seen to Pat Jennings. And I used to go over one day a week. Don Howe was at QPR at the time and got me to go over and coach this guy. And I came to George Graham when he had a problem with Lukey, contract, John Lukic. And he said, we're thinking of signing this guy. And I said, he will be the next England goalie. This is the closest thing I've seen to Pat Jennings. He's totally unflappable. He's got extraordinary presence. And on that save, Paul Pesci-Solido in that final, funnily enough, I was filing the photograph of it today. It is the most amazing thing to see the right hand almost scoop the ball from behind the line. And you can see Sheffield United fans on their feet. It's a goal. It's going to be an equaliser. Uh-oh, hang on a minute.
Yeah, I remember it was fairly late on in the game, wasn't it? I remember at the time watching it thinking we couldn't play any worse. It was one of those semi-final performances.
Absolutely, I was there. And there's one funny story at the end of it because he makes the save. It's unbelievable. Schmeichel, Peter Schmeichel, because everybody says at the time, well, Schmeichel, I saw a podcast with Ian Wright and Gary and whatnot say they put Schmeichel above Seaman, and I would have probably gone the other way, but I would have put the two of them alike. But even Peter Schmeichel said that is the greatest save I've ever seen. At the time, he had actually said that. But when the game was finished, we were in the sort of a players area afterwards at Old Trafford, because it was at Old Trafford, you see, in Manchester. And suddenly the goalie came through the door, and I look, and he looks towards me, and I didn't smile or anything. He's got a big grin on his face. And I said, what were you doing? I'd have caught that. Which set him off on one, totally. He absolutely set him off. Because, it was the most extraordinary save. And I just said, I'd have caught that, David, I'd have caught that.
You'd have made a meal of that, David.
Okay.
Yeah, the strength in the hand, it was incredible.
Yeah. Big, strong guy. You've got to remember, when I played, I was the tallest goalie in the league at 6'1" until Joe Corrigan arrived on the scene in about 74 or 5. 73. And I was 6'1". So Banksy was 5'10.5". Big Pat was only 6 foot. And David 6'4.5". Courtois 6'7". And with the modern ball and the movement on the ball, the bigger you are now, the taller you are, the more chance you've got top corner. It's like Petr Cech made a save against Man City in the semi-final of the FA Cup 2 or 3 years ago that no other goalie in the country other than Courtois would have made it. And just because of his height, such a tall guy, but we were smaller. We played on pitches that were mud heaps. We had bare hands apart from cotton gloves if it was really muddy. It's so different.
Talking of that evolution, is it? How do you feel the modern FA Cup is seen? Because I think even in our lifetimes of viewings over the last 30 odd years, I personally sense that there's probably less emphasis on it in the eyes of the fan, the media. Why do you think that is? Because for us, as part of our childhood and watching football, the FA Cup final day was always the biggest day of the footballing calendar.
Definitely. And even when I went into the media side of it, every cup final day I was at Wembley from the beginning of the day until the end of the day, or when I went to ITV, actually presenting the cup final as well. But it was the day of all days at the end of a season. It brought the season to an end. Now, obviously, Champions League, It's actually all the monetary side as well. It's the build-up of the Champions League now.
Yeah.
When you think of Sky having it, when I went to ITV, we were the only ones who had Champions League, or European Cup as it was called. No, Champions League it was by then anyway. And so, that has taken over us. But I don't think you can ever beat the atmosphere of an FA Cup final day even now, because as long as they keep, Abide With Me and the national anthem and everything that goes with it, then I think it's going to remain. It will remain a great day that, I agree with you, has been a little bit sort of overlooked or surpassed by Champions League and obviously being champions of your country.
Yeah, I was doing a bit of research the other day about this, and I didn't realise that only, I think it was, you could say, the established top 6 clubs that we all talk about now, only two clubs outside of that have won the FA Cup since about 1995, I think, when Everton won it, which just goes to show that
it's still valued.
Exactly, the top sides are still treating it with the care it deserves.
I think it's by the by, but I personally would like them to stop playing the semi-finals at Wembley, which would help as well, because I think that's always a nice thing to get to Wembley. Should be.
Yeah, I agree 100% on that. I mean, I think it should be the ultimate to play at Wembley Stadium. So I think it devalues the competition. But then again, we're going to get onto the monetary side of the game, and
Can of worms then, isn't it? I did want to just quickly touch on, you mentioned there, obviously, when Arsene came to the club, you yourself have been involved, therefore, as a coach at Arsenal for a good few years previous to that, and actually had seen, therefore, a few managers come and go. And I just wanted to sort of capture your thoughts around that coaching period, and actually sort of the different styles and your involvement in the club, but actually how that evolved with the different managers that we had over that period.
Yeah, well, I mean, when Arsene arrived, you see, I became goalkeeping coach. I'd only finished playing a year when Terry Neal came to me and said, "You've got an idea, haven't you?" I actually went to the FA and said, "Look, goalkeepers need coaches. There are no goalkeeping coaches in the country. It's ridiculous." And they turned down everything that I suggested. It's a school teacher in me. And anyway, Terry Neal it was who said, "Willow, do you want to come in?" I mean, I never got paid in 28 years of goalkeeping coach. I was only paid anything at all in the last 3 years of my coaching career, when Arsene got to know that Harry Redknapp tried to get me to go to West Ham and was offering me a considerable amount of money to do it. So I got some remuneration there, but it was Terry Neal who gave me the opportunity. And then a lot of goalkeeping coaches since then have come up and said, "Willow, I've got my job now as a result of you doing what you did." So when Arsene arrived, I had been obviously coaching the goalies for quite a long time. And I still tell this story. He arrived the previous day, had gone to Highbury, had fallen in love with Highbury. He's always told me that. And then what happened then was that he did a press conference outside the ground when there was some really, really dodgy press questions put to him. And I think if I'd been Arsene, I'd have got on the next plane home and gone back to France, well, he'd come from Japan, obviously. But anyway, the following day he arrives at London Coney, and I'm getting changed, and Pat Rice walked in with this guy with spectacles. And I obviously knew who it was. And he said, "Oh, Mr. Wenger, this is Bob Wilson. He's a fanatical Arsenal man. He, says everything that happens is because of Arsenal," and made the introduction, and it was very formal. And I said, you were at Highbury yesterday, and yes, it is one of the best grounds I have ever seen in my life. And he was just so pleased to be there. Now, we were at the training ground, which is now used by Watford. It was the University College of London training grounds, next door to where we now have London Coney Arsenal training ground. And he was so full of Highbury. He was so great to be there. And about 45 minutes later, he came back in when I was just about to go out to do the goalies, coach the goalies, and he was shaking his head. And he was going, "I do not understand. This is Arsenal. I do not understand." And he couldn't understand the facility, that there was fabulous facilities, lovely pitches, but it wasn't a purpose-built Arsenal Football Club renting, and you couldn't train on a Wednesday because students were coming in. I mean, it didn't make sense to him. So, I mean, from that moment, I know Arsene, depending on how he got on, which of course he had an immediate impact, it was always, we're going to have a purpose-built training ground. The fact that it became next door on the pitch, on the fields next door is by the way, but he persuaded all the directors who bought into what he was doing, because they said they'd never seen anything like him. So that was a training ground. And then his next, and I remember this as clear as clear, his next thing was, if we are hoping ever to compete with Real Madrid, Barcelona, Manchester United, we cannot do it on 38,000 fans. Now, okay, when we won the first cup, it wasn't all seater, and we had 51,000 there. But when it became all seater, it was 38,000. So Arsene, from that moment, was at the board again, saying, "Look, we're going to have to look," you know. And it was like, I know it was, you can't move from Highbury. This is Art Deco. This is Art Deco. It's an Art Deco building. And the fact that it was 3 streets away, and they bought out 100 little businesses, just shows you how that board bought into Arsene's dream, and there were 100 businesses, small businesses on that, where the 60,000 Emirates Stadium now sits. And so he was a visionary. Arsene is and remains a visionary.
How do you feel about the Emirates? Because granted, your name and your silhouette is plastered on the side, which is a big plus point, which probably wouldn't have got away with on the Art Deco East and West, as you rightly point out. But obviously for fans like ourselves, I spent the first sort of 16 years of going to Highbury, and I guess a lot of us still miss it quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there was never a football ground like it. When I skipped off university, when Bertie Mee had said, "Look, Billy Wright wants to meet you, I want you to sign a provisional contract," and I skipped off university and I borrowed a car and we drove down the street. It was on Avonhill Road, and then I turned and I came and I looked and I thought, this isn't a normal football ground. And then I walked in the marble halls, faced the Herbert Chapman bust. Then Billy Wright arrived, charming guy, Billy Wright always. And then he took me to the dressing rooms. I came from the dressing rooms down the tunnel, which obviously then became, you know, the last moment of nerves for me when I was going out to play. Went out onto the pitch, and I've always dramatically said, this isn't a football ground. This is a cathedral. This is like a cathedral. And I fell in love with the place totally at that time. And I think it was really, really sad, as so many Arsenal fans. I mean, the modern stadium, everybody else is gone. All the other clubs have come, Liverpool, Man United, Chelsea particularly. Abramovich came and seen the Arsenal purpose-built training ground at London Coney. But it's not Highbury, you know.
Yeah. Talking of your coaching role, Bob, what do you think is the biggest challenge for a goalkeeping coach now in the modern game? Because I just feel with every mistake under the spotlight, as you were, and being scrutinised online. I mean, our goalie at the moment, Bernd Leno, it must be difficult for a goalkeeping coach for the psychological side of the game at the moment.
Well, I mean, obviously the coach has got to instill that confidence. And you have to be realistic and you have to be honest. You know, you go back to me where I had an absolute diamond in my game, which I told you about, but was useless on my kicking initially, was absolutely useless. But I very quickly, when it came to realizing how important it was for crosses, you mentioned Bernd Leno. Bernd Leno, I think, is probably at this moment in time the best reaction goalkeeper for instinctive saves in the Premier League. What I want to see to complete the whole picture is his ability to come for crosses. And he is doing it more and more, but I know that it's a part of him. You see, the modern ball travels so quickly as well, so I have to be careful what I'm saying. The old ball was a leather ball, and the guy, I mean, I had 2 quite small fullbacks, Ricey and McNabb. I had 2 quite small centre halves in Simpson and McClintock. So they were dependent on me going out to face the likes of John Toshak or whoever it might be, Derek Dugan, Martin Chivers. So it was a war, 1 against 1. So I think Bernd has to just add that to his game, and then he's going to be top draw. without any doubt, international and everything. So, the goalkeeping, it'll never change. The one thing that will never change, and the game has changed in almost every respect: pitch, playing surface, the pitch, the ball, the kit. Everything has changed except the size of the ruddy goals. And to fill that goal, takes a lot of confidence and, I guess ability. And you've got to love the position. You have got to love the position to want to be a goalkeeper.
Going to put you on the spot then slightly, and what I'll do is ask this question, and to say, if you can't pick David Seaman, it would be fantastic to hear from you, sort of the top 3 goalkeepers you coached at Arsenal. And then, like you say, because they'll have different facets. Some will be fantastic shot stoppers, some will be really commanding their box, some will be great personalities. But it'd be nice to put you on the spot and say what sort of your top 3 in your coaching days at Arsenal.
Well, I mean, without any doubt. I mean, I couldn't really part, as great goalkeepers, except that David has won 10 major trophies and runner-up in another 4 or 5. I mean, David and Pat Jennings had this incredible presence, 2 of the greatest goalkeepers of all time. Not just, I'm talking about all time. I had the privilege of working alongside them. And then I think, I'm trying to think, I want to be fair to all those who were there at the time. And I mean, John Lukic was so underrated. John Lukic was born in Chesterfield, where I was born. And people just didn't realize just how good this guy was. And it was only because, David Seaman would never have come to Arsenal had Lukey signed the contract with George, but they had a disagreement over something, probably salary. I don't know.
How about we've got someone like Richard Wright, who's now coaching at Man City.
Yeah, an interesting thing with Richard, because he had an amazingly long career. For the latter part of his career, he wasn't playing. He was always number 2 or whatever, number two. And I mean, I saw him when he was, I don't know what age he was. A very interesting thing about Richard on his first day, because I was quite surprised about the size, how tall he was. I mean, now going back to him coming into the modern game and me thinking, wow, he's a bit like Hans Seggers, And if you remember Hans Seggers, he wasn't a tall guy at all, but had amazing agility. So what you make up in lack of height, you make up with fantastically fast feet. But I remember on the first coaching day when he was there, and I said, look, I'm going to give you every opportunity. And he was great. I mean, he was great throughout the time. He had a wonderful career in the game. But I know when we were doing the exercise I told you about, when I shout turn and I'm looking for how far he can get off his line. And the goalie, David Seaman, said to me, Bobby says, what do you think I'm seeing here? So I said, I know what you're going to say. There's a lot of goals still because of his height.
Yeah.
That's about the presence and because of his height. And so I very quickly, as best I could, would say to him, look, David's 6'4.5", and you're 6'1" at the most, or 6'2". And therefore, when we are straight on, Richard, when we're straight on, there's a lot of goal either side. So how can you make that goal small? I remember saying it to him. And he said, by coming closer to you. I said, yeah. But if you come closer to me, another 2 yards, 3 yards, the goal becomes smaller. But what is your problem then? And he said, reaction time. He was so switched on. So, you make the goal smaller because because you're getting closer to the guy who's about to shoot, but your reaction time is lost. So he was incredibly bright, Richard. Incredibly bright, and obviously went on to have a wonderful career in the
Man
game.
City now, isn't he, doing some coaching?
Yeah.
I mean, you talked of your frustration earlier about the modern game sort of playing out from the back, sort of almost relentlessly at times, isn't it? What do you think about the new rule then that came in? Was it a year ago, I think, or maybe this season, where goalies can play out from a goal kick on the floor and players can be in the area and take it from there? Because that's encouraging that, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it's exactly doing that. It's encouraging it. I will maintain. I hate it. I really hate it. To me, the ball needs to keep moving. as quickly as you can to go from defence to attack if you've been under attack, and I still think our way of playing the game. I mean, Pat Jennings and David. I mean, Pat Jennings actually scored a goal. You know, he and you know, they scored. They actually. And that's the old form of ball, just when it was in transition, not the modern tiny thin ball. David Seaman could land the ball easily from the edge of our box into the opposition's box. And several goalies can do that, particularly with the modern ball. Why should you play out fiddle, fiddle, fiddle?
Yeah.
Why shouldn't you go more direct? You know, you might suddenly say, well, I'm going to be a fan of the way Graham Taylor and Watford did what they did because they were more direct. But my God, I think I said to you earlier in our talk here today, the worst thing a centre-half wants is to see the ball coming out the sun at him and it's moving in the air as the modern balls do, and you are backing off. You've got somebody coming down on you, and you are, unless you're the Liverpool great centre-half that they have at the moment, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So I find it frustrating. I would always, at this moment, sit down with Pep and anybody and say, okay, I'll show you, you show me the times when you've gone from playing out from the back and it's resulted in a goal. And I'll show you how many times we go direct and it leads to a goal.
It's interesting because Edison, he often, the irony is that they're encouraged to play that way, yet I can think of occasions last season and even in a cup final, I think maybe the Carabao Cup final where they beat us a year or two ago.
Yeah.
And one of the goals came from a goal kick straight to Aguero over the top.
I think things are cyclical though, aren't they? I think what will happen is there will be this period where it is the mandate to play out from the back, keep it on the ground. And then I think what you'll probably see is a team come along, a bit like Pep's Barcelona team did, which then sort of changed the way in European football they look at things for the next 4 or 5 years, as it has done, or a bit longer than that now. And I think, and I hope, to Bob's point, I think for a bit of diversity, I think there'll probably be a team who comes along, plays a long ball slightly more, bit more physicality rather than the smaller technicians. And then I think you'll see the sway go the other way again, and they're suddenly playing that way.
Yeah, because Burnley, I suppose, aren't they, Tom? Really, at the moment, Burnley are that team, aren't they? That one side that everyone talks about.
Yeah, that's a brilliant. That's brilliant to pick out. You know, I mean, the job he has done, Sean, has been extraordinary. But I'm thinking about, you know, one of my roommates who's a character and a half, had about 13 managerial jobs and about 15 clubs, and I'm talking about Bobby Gould and Wimbledon, the crazy gang. I mean, how did the way they played the game, you know? So I mean, Graham Taylor at Watford. When you think about that as well, you know how at that time, what a good side they were. Probably a very good chairman with Elton as well, keeping them all happy.
Yeah, so that's why I'm not sure if it's just nostalgia or if it's the case, but that's why for fans of the modern game, we often look at that late 90s team, sort of the 98 double team of Arsenal and the very early 2000s, as almost the perfect mix between the technical football, when you had Bergkamp, Pires and people like that at the club, but equally you still had a lot of that physicality in the game, you still had a lot of that pace, you still had a lot of that strength.
And for me,
for me certainly as a fan, that's kind of like a favourite era from sort of early 90s through to sort of early 2000s. That
blending of those styles, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, what you're talking about there, you've got incredible physicality. Oh, you know, you think of Vieira and you think of the guys, and you think of the Sol Campbell time as well. You think of the power of those guys, but then you've got, you know, Pires, genius. Bergkamp, genius. Wrighty for a goal-scoring genius. You know, all those guys along, you know, they were just absolutely. It was fantastic. It was a fantastic period for Arsenal, obviously.
It was, I think, one of my abiding memories, and we spoke about Highbury earlier, and so to that point was the 98, after we'd beaten Everton to win the title, then I was sitting East Upper that day, and you could still look out the top of the windows, and I was looking down at the road, obviously, of the fans, but also the players sort of leaning out and Ian Wright holding his medal on the 98 piece, and that's when
showing his bottom.
Well, quite, yeah,
as well as
and the rest, absolutely. So, one of the abiding memories. I wonder if, Bob, we could move on slightly just to talk a little bit about the Willow Foundation, a little bit, and obviously the genesis of that, and obviously Anna's passing, but also the fantastic impact it's had over the last sort of 20 years for so many thousands of people. I think it's more than 17,000 special days, and that's just fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, considering, I mean, after Anna died 6 days before her 32nd birthday on December 1 in 98. And I mean, it was devastating. She was an extraordinary girl. She was a community nursing sister. She always, throughout her 16 life-saving ops and her chemo and her radiotherapy, and I guess she knew what was going to happen. It was always, Mum, Dad, we're going to have fun, aren't we? We're going to have a laugh. We're going to do this. And Anna came up with this idea that always in her diary through her treatment, she had something to look forward to. In that case, in Anna's case, it was Take That. She adored Take That at the time, particularly Robbie Williams and Gary and the guys. And she would love retail shopping with her mum, which we were able to do a bit extravagantly. So Anna's idea was that in the diary, you know, she'd be in the middle of treatment and having a really horrid time, and then suddenly it would be, do you know what, it's only 10 days before we go to this concert or that concert. I remember her last concert ever was a Streisand concert. And then she would have the day, and the next few days she'd be on this adrenaline rush. You would not know that she was losing her battle with her life. She was just, oh, what about this? And she would be flying. I mean, the best example came with the This Is Your Life program, which was on November the 2nd, 98. And they cancelled it twice because she was so ill. And then suddenly I'm coaching the goalies and suddenly find my lovely workmate, Jill Dando, the late Jill Dando. And I find Michael Aspel with the Red Bull. And I said, look, guys, I'm sorry, Anna's too ill. I don't want to do this. And they stopped and they said, hang on a minute, Bob. And they got a phone. And on the end of the phone, they said, look, we wanted to listen to this. And they'd rung Megs, who was in the car going to the studio at the time. And Anna was there. Dad, I'm ready to party. And what happened on that night, I mean, it was an extraordinary night in every respect, was that the following day, we went round to see Anna. And honestly, I mean, she was in her wheelchair by then. She only had 3 more weeks to live. And you would not have known that she only had 3 weeks left. And she was, Dad, what about when your double side came on? What about when the boys came on? What about when Johnny Mathis came on from Los Angeles, Dad? You know, because I bought every record that Mathis ever made and whatnot. And so, I mean, she was flying, and for 10 days, you would not have known that she was running out of time. And it was from that in the last week or so of her life, she said to her mum, you know, use what you've learned. Don't let this thing destroy you. Use what you've learned. And Megs was like, what have I learned? What have we learned? And it was Anna's special days. So no charity did the age group 16 to 40. Lots of wonderful children's charities, but the age group 16 to 40 sort of neglected. So we gave special days, 17,500 now, for seriously ill young adults in the age group 16, specifically age group 16 to 40. And it has been an amazing story, you know, 18 special days in year 1 out of a back bedroom in Brooklands Park, Hertfordshire, and 40 staff as we have now, all but 5 of them furloughed, 6 shops all closed, 200 special days on hold, and money running out. So it's you've got me at a really difficult time, and
Absolutely.
You know, but it's been 20 years, and we must look at that, and our trustees are trying like mad to keep Willow alive. Yeah.
How Andrew and I met was sort of 20 odd years ago, 25 years ago now, at an Arsenal in the community event, sort of soccer schools for young children. And I think it just speaks to the power of sport and football unto itself, about what fantastic good it can do and give so much hope to so many people. And I appreciate Willow, not just sport, as you said, there's lots of concerts, lots of events, lots of socials, everything's fantastic. But football at the heart of that has been fantastic for us personally. Yeah,
well, I mean, football has been my life, complete life. Again, I mean, I'm a bit of a one for dramatizing, or maybe over dramatizing. But I mean, I say without Arsenal Football Club, there would be no Bob Wilson as the public now know me. And I mean, that has to be true. You know, had I been a school teacher, or I'd probably gone to Man United and never made it, or whatever. But I mean, not only did I have the time I had there, initially difficult, but ultimately crazy, wonderful. And then as a result of Arsenal and having the Loughborough University background, came the opportunity to be asked to the television and to be the first footballer to be asked to present Grandstand and Football Focus, which still lives on with Dan. So Football Focus, Grandstand, all the World Cups, 9 World Cups in the end, I was involved with. So, I would not have done that if I had not been Bob Wilson, Arsenal goalkeeper at a successful time.
How has your relationship changed with football over the years, Bob, being a husband, then as a father, and then now as a grandfather?
Well, I still love football. I mean, the kids, there are 6 tickets now. We need the grandchildren going. My 2 boys, John and Robert, still go to the games. I want the grandchildren to go. The club are amazing now. Often I get invited into the director's box by David Miles, the club secretary, and that's always a huge privilege and a pleasure. There is nothing if they would ask, I'm an ambassador for the Arsenal Foundation, which does extraordinary work in the community, as you probably know, and has been doing, by the way, throughout the whole of the pandemic. And to me, there is no football club like Arsenal. Even before I was a player, I knew that from the days of Herbert Chapman, because I was into football so much, and from his period of 1925 through the 30s, people forget Arsenal won the league 3 years running. Albeit in the 30s, I know, a lot different to now. But everything about the club, the history of the club, but it was beyond that. It was the way they went about things, the way also when we were on tours, we did things in a different way. We traveled on separate planes so that if there would be a dreadful Munich disaster, there would only be half that would be injured or whatever. Everything they did, our suits that we wore, the badge, I mean, it was just the gun at that time. I used to love wearing that. It was Regent Street that we got them made. They didn't hang around. Everything they did, absolutely. Everything, the way we traveled, the hotels we went to, this is Arsenal Football Club. And hopefully that will never be lost.
Well, I was going to say, do you, very early days in his managerial tenure, but do you see Mikel Arteta in the future Arsenal, not only obviously hopefully carrying on those traditions of class and of the club, but actually being successful on the pitch? What's your view of the current manager?
I'm excited. I'm really, really excited. This guy is a very, very bright boy. He's had again, it's probably a privilege for him, but he's had, the fact that he's been with Guardiola for the time he's been there, and you could always see how Pep would turn to him and be asking him things, and why did they do this or why did they do that? So his knowledge of Pep's way of doing things and everything, but he speaks for himself. From the moment he arrived, and you've got to remember, he was a captain at Arsenal. He like I'm saying about Arsenal as a football club, loved Arsenal Football Club, still loves Arsenal Football Club, and would do anything to make sure that the fans get what they deserve and what they want. But you just hear him speak and you think, this guy is a little bit different, I mean, we know Arsene was different, and we were all in him, and certainly the players were shocked once the pastas came in instead of steaks and eggs and beer, and everything went out of it. And the same way, I think Mikel, I've not even had a chance since he arrived to speak to him, and I was goalkeeping coach when he was playing there, still goalkeeping coach, and I wish him all the very best, and I'm really excited that that the club have gone for him at this time. It's a huge responsibility for him.
It was only a press conference, but that first press conference, it was so impressive. I don't think I've seen a press conference like it in terms of the precision in what he was saying, the belief in what he was saying, that you're our leader now, and it felt like that.
I'm 100%. I just, I have fingers crossed, everything crossed. Arsenal Football Club, we're third in the list of trophies. We are behind Man United and Liverpool. The Northwest has always been the firing point, but certainly in London, we came within 8 minutes of winning the Champions League and didn't win that, but we are currently 30 major trophies or just over, and about 17 charity shields. If you count that, it's still a trophy. And we're third in line, and the people who run the club, I do hope the owner can can understand the history in the way that you two guys, understand the history, that I understand the history. And it needs that combined effort. Yeah. Because at the bottom, at this moment where we are in the game, it is about the money. So if you've got an oligarch or you've got a sheikh, and I'm obviously talking about Chelsea and Manchester City, you've got a hugely improved chance. Otherwise, you're Man United with 75,000 and United being what United are as a club, and since Munich and even before. So I'm hoping beyond hope that the club understand. When I say the club, I'm talking about the people who are responsible. And I would like it, obviously, that the owner also understands that as well.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Bob. Thank you so much for your time.
No, it's okay. Absolutely no problem. It's taken me away from. I've been refiling all the goalkeeping years. Today, I've been painting a little bit today on some kitchen chairs.
Yeah,
got to be done. Got to be done.
The house has never looked so smart and clean, but.
Those hands are still working magic.
Such a fantastic chat.
At the Emirates.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, we always see you plastered on the side, so maybe in person at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
you can complain when they move me and say, "Oh, he's the oldest one, get rid of him." You can complain.
no chance. Well, I think there's a couple of names. That'll be a different debate for another day. But I think there's a couple of names that should go before you do, if we make room for new players. Thanks very much, Bob. It's been fantastic.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Take care, Bob.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
See you later.
Bye.
Well, that was absolutely fantastic, Tom, wasn't it? Did you enjoy that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Having Bob on is a bit of a thrill. Absolute pleasure. Although he wasn't a massive fan of playing out from the back, the Pep tick-attacker. Mind you, I think if Pep is listening, I'm not sure he will be, but if Pep's listening, I think he's not done too badly over the last 10 years. So I'm not sure he'll mind too much. But no, I completely agree, mate. I think hearing that insight about Bob's life and obviously playing at the top level was phenomenal. And obviously for a fan like myself, hearing about that 1971 double and that FA Cup final, it's just fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of FA Cup, we've probably got tons of memories since probably the early 90s of the FA Cups. Any ones that stand out for you that are particularly flash up when you think of the FA Cup straight away?
Yeah, and beyond really, because obviously, we did mention it on the pod, but for me, FA Cup final day was a big special moment when you're growing up. There's a 3 or 4 hours build up on the BBC beforehand. They'd be playing classic finals from yesteryear. Obviously, I were born in the late 80s, but a couple of finals stand out from then, when that sort of were entrenched in me by my dad and my friends and family, like the Wimbledon upset of Liverpool. The crazy gang beating Liverpool. I think Liverpool would have done the double that year as well. I think they would have done when Wimbledon beat them 1-0. Who scored that goal? Was it Laurie Sanchez? I think.
Laurie Sanchez. I mean, and then obviously he went on to become manager of Wycombe Wanderers, and that amazing day when they won at Filbert Street against Leicester with the Essendon header in the last minute. I remember that commentary.
But that kind of era was just littered with upsets, wasn't it? The year before that Wimbledon-Liverpool final, Coventry beat Spurs 3-2. And what's been really interesting for me, and I'm sure everyone's been enjoying it at home as well, is that how many of the old classics, not only FA Cup games, but lots of games from down the years have been replaying on Sky and BBC and all sorts in the last few weeks. And they played the Coventry Spurs final in '87, 3-2. That's a fantastic game. FA Cup's been a special thing, part of my life when I was a kid.
Quite a more recent memory for us personally was, do you remember running to catch that penalty shootout against Arsenal Wigan at Wembley? Running through Mill Hill High Street trying to find a pub.
Absolutely, trying to find somewhere to watch it. That was obviously, I think that was 2014. So Arsenal went on to beat Hull in the final as well. 2-0 down in the first 10 or 15 minutes against Hull. To come back and win that, end a 9-year trophy drought. Yeah, there's
something about an FA Cup struggle, I think, that makes it just more sweet. I think some of the memories of our finals that we've had with Arsenal, the tighter the game, naturally the more emotive it is, really. The penalty shootout against Man United at Millennium Stadium with Vieira's last kick, the Chelsea one as well with Parler's screamer.
2-0.
I
just think the FA Cup stands out for me as still the pinnacle of a cup final day. So the Premier League is phenomenal. It's a greater achievement to win your league. That's not even in doubt. It's the best thing for me. But actually, it's not one day. The FA Cup final day growing up was just huge.
Mm.
I remember, I think it was 97, Di Matteo goal for Chelsea against Middlesbrough in the first like 30, 40 seconds.
Yeah.
And I think I was just at my grandparents or something like that. And I was having a barbecue out the front. And I remember running back out and telling my dad, "Oh, Chelsea already won that up." And then the game had just started. Like, it was such a big occasion.
Yeah.
There you have Chelsea against Middlesbrough. No one there that day was a Chelsea fan. No one there that day was a Middlesbrough fan. But it didn't matter. Everyone was really interested.
Yeah, it draws you in,
the
doesn't
FA
it?
Cup final. It's the cup final. You know,
I mean, as Bob mentioned, Bob said earlier that as long as they keep Abide With Me and the national anthem, etc., it will always be draped in nostalgia and emotion. I think, like we discussed,
so.
it is in danger, I guess, of being overlooked. But you'd like to think that hopefully the fans keep it going through the generations, that sort of importance and tie that they feel to it.
Yeah, and I think you've just made a really good point in our discussion with Bob, that actually, if you look at the winners of the FA Cup in the last 10, 15 years, they're top teams. They're all from the big six, as it were, by and large anyway. I think there's only one or two outliers in the last 15 years. So the big clubs do take it seriously. The fact that they rest a couple of players in early rounds, I think that's sometimes focused on too much by the media. I think that's kind of always happened. You play the team that you think is capable of winning the game.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily sure that playing your best 11 when you're at home against someone in the National League or someone in League Two or even League One, why would you do that? The same way you'd rotate your squad in a Premier League game if you don't need to win it. So I think these big clubs clearly take the FA Cup still very seriously. I think for fans, the nostalgia's slightly gone, but personally for me, it's still a phenomenal piece.
I mean, it's a trophy. It's a trophy that's attached to upsets, amazing highs, cup runs from clubs that shouldn't be anywhere near a quarter-final or a semi-final. It changes clubs' progression, doesn't it? I mean, if you're a lower league team and you can get 2 or 3 games together against and then draw a Man United or a Chelsea, then it also sorts you out financially for a year or two. So it really, really is a life-saving competition.
Cup draws as well. Do you know? I think when people always look back at saying, waiting for the cup draw, balls in the hat, sees comes out. I think that's still a special thing for football fans. I think maybe we're of that generation who still value that a bit more than it is in the modern game. I think it also suffers slightly just from sort of the League Cup. The League Cup obviously also being potentially not as established or as recognised as it once was. I think there'll always be a place for the FA Cup final and the FA Cup. I think that's without doubt. I grew up on memories from my dad of him going himself to see the Arsenal Man United 3-2 final in 1979. You know, when we got the last minute winner.
It's like I said. It's just we just hope that I guess our generation and other generations can keep the relationship going with it as fans, because like you've just said there with your dad, hopefully we can also pass that on, so it doesn't die out.
No, that's why I think it needs classic cup finals and classic runs, to pass that on to the generations. I think that's a natural conclusion. There's also been, although there's been, you can't beat the heartache of a FA Cup as well. Again, Arsenal fan talking, I appreciate that. But Ryan Giggs' goal, 1999 against Arsenal, last minute of the game, taking on half the team. Taking on half the team and scoring that goal. I mean, you've got Ricky Villa's goal for Spurs in that cup final replay. I mean, you've got some fantastic goals from
Ian Wright's goal for Palace.
Oh yeah, which almost enigmatic. Started his career, came to the game late, and he still talks about that as one of his biggest moments of his life, let alone elsewhere. So yeah, I mean, it's just a massive. Got the Norman Whiteside one. The cup final goal, people make careers and make names. Charlie George, winner, as obviously we've spoken about today with Bob. Like, people make names and careers off the back of the FA Cup.
I remember sitting there watching, I think it was Stevenage knock out Newcastle. Grazioli, I think, scored a goal to make a 1-0 win for Stevenage as well. So yeah, littered with memories. Yeah.
No, it wasn't even who did that bicycle kick? It was like one of the best goals the last 40, 50 years. It's always shown. Trevor Sinclair. Trevor Sinclair did that, and that was in the FA Cup. We literally bicycle kick from like 20 yards. Careers and goals are made of legends of that. So, absolutely.
Plenty of emotions.
Completely, lots of emotions. And speaking of FA Cup runs, though, we are really excited next week to bring you a lower league captain who's had a bit of a cup run himself. He'll be talking and focusing on the financials and the pressures currently with coronavirus and lockdown and the impact that's happening on lower league football. That's going to be a really interesting chat, so we're excited about that. Thank you everyone for tuning in. You'll find HTO Football on all the usual channels. We're at HTO Football on Twitter, also on Facebook. So keep listening, keep tuning in. And as I say, tune in next week for Josh Casey, Woking FC captain.
Take care, guys.